Hi guys, it's us again. Just really excited to be bringing you more information. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast thus far. I cannot believe tomorrow will be officially 2 weeks. Well, I'm giving away when we're doing these podcasts and when we release them. But it's a pleasure, again, in partnership with FluxMans attorneys who have joined us to answer some of those really technical questions. And even us being, we were interviewed, or I was interviewed a week ago, the process we were going through, and I think a lot of these labour questions have been posed to us, and there's a fine line between what is right to look after your staff and also what is legal, and so I hope we can cover some of those. It's my pleasure to invite Bronwyn Marques, as you can see over there. Hi Bronwyn, she's looking very professional with that backdrop there. She looks like she's sitting in studio. Which he probably is. And Bronwyn, thank you for joining us, taking the time. You can see you're a director of FluxMans and balancing family and giving us this time, so we appreciate it. I guess we're all in the same boat.
Thank you very much for having me, Debbie. It's a pleasure.
So, Bronwyn, we have a few questions we'd like to go through, and it's probably some technical things, but I think there's possibly a lot of conversation around those already happening. So if we have time, we can get to those. Maybe as a kickstart, and in your experience and advice to small business at the moment, how do they access, because there's a lot of terms and conditions from what I've seen around what kind of labour relief and what Uif is putting on the table, and where do they even start?
Yeah, it's very tricky, and it's also interesting because none of us have done this before. So it's very new and innovative and very forward-thinking from the Department of Labour and the Minister. And hopefully, once you do apply for these benefits, they will manifest, you know. The first one that the government has offered is something called TERS. It's the Temporary Employer Relief Scheme.
Yeah.
And this is a scheme where a company closes part of its business or the whole of its business, and where they can't afford to pay their employees, a company would apply for this benefit. Yeah.
Do they have to, is it just a temporary closure? How would they state that they've closed that part of the business?
It could be, it would be not for more than 3 months. So it has to be a closure, but not for more than 3 months.
Okay, okay. And the other schemes?
So there's another scheme that employers would claim on behalf of employees. It's called the illness benefit. That's where employees have gone and self-quarantine for 14 days. An employer would claim on behalf of the employee. They have to write a letter, and it's also from the Uif. All of these benefits stem from the Uif.
Okay. And in terms of self-quarantining, so I think one of the questions we see is whether they will actually get anything from Uif and how much. So at your example, the not TERS, the second one, if you now go and claim for the 14 days, would it only be a portion of their salary as like a maternity benefit?
Yes. So what I've seen is that it's on the Uif sliding scale. It's the 38% to 60%, and you can't get less than 3,500 Rand, which is the minimum rate of remuneration at the moment. For TERS, I think that the maximum amount is 17,000 Rand, 17,712 Rand per employee.
Okay.
So the amount that will be paid to the employer, and they've got to pay that amount to each employee, obviously on a sliding scale as well, because not everybody will earn 17,000 Rand a month.
No, precisely. And what do you, in your experience, do you think will be the turnaround for Uif to actually process this? And I'm probably coming from a personal front to one who had to try and get maternity out of Uif, and that was something I don't want to have to go through again.
No, I can imagine. So they are saying that it should be 30 days from the date of submission.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, we do have Uif actually as a partner with Smart Procurement, and they have sent a whole lot of paperwork through, so we will be sharing it below. Is there any suggestions you can make, though, to companies around applying for TERS, applying for the benefit if your staff is the illness benefit? Is it just these two benefits?
Well, those are the benefits that employers can claim from the Uif. The employees themselves can also claim. There's something, if they are on a reduced working time, they can claim from the Uif. That is obviously, now that implies they've gone on short time, or they're not working, they've either closed or they're working less hours and therefore their income is reduced. They could claim the difference between what they get paid and the Uif entitlement. They may very well not be entitled to anything because of the sliding scale, but that's in theory what they would be entitled to claim.
Okay. And there would be paperwork that the employer would also have to complete on their behalf, or is that purely the employee would say based on their situation?
This is purely something the employee would claim.
Okay.
Then obviously, if in the unfortunate circumstance of an employee passing away, they could also claim a death benefit from the Uif. So a spouse or a life partner could claim that benefit. And if there's no spouse or life partner, a child, or the child could claim it if the spouse or life partner hasn't claimed it within 6 months of the person passing away.
Okay. So, and that has to be a COVID-19 death, or?
Absolutely, it has to be as a result of COVID-19, of course.
Well, yes. let's hold fingers and thumbs that the death rate is not going to skyrocket. It's been not great, but not the worst. So, yeah, really, really hoping.
There's something also interesting. The Compensation for Occupational Injuries and Diseases Act has also now defined COVID-19 as an occupational disease that you could acquire at work.
Okay. And then what does that mean?
That means that if an employee contracts COVID-19 in the course and scope of their employment, they have to officially be diagnosed as having COVID-19, and the symptoms obviously have to have resulted from work.
Yes.
They would be able to claim in terms of, they call it the COIDA Act.
Okay, and who do they do that through? Uif? No.
So it's the Compensation Commissioner.
Okay. Sure, that's very, very good to know. And it sounds like the government really has put a lot of options on the table. And I hope with what Uif is also giving us to show people how to actually fill out the paperwork, that they will be able to access it in the time that they need it.
I was going to say, I've seen a few of these easy guides. And there's an email address that I've seen that you email, and then they give you all the paperwork and the information. And you need to just make sure, my advice to the employers and employees would be that they must just have all the relevant documentation available to make the process as quick and flawless and seamless as possible.
Fantastic. I think this has really been helpful for any of our small businesses listening, and hopefully just give their staff a little bit of something to hold on to until those small businesses can swing around. I mean, there's businesses that just literally aren't able to operate under lockdown, and possibly even for the next 6 weeks. So this is very, very helpful. So would that be the full scope of options?
That's the relief that's available at the moment. I have seen that something came through today. There's directives coming out all the time, which is very interesting. You know, this is the first time we're dealing with something like this. So it is new areas for all of us. And I'm not really sure how it's all going to pan out and all of that. But I see that bargaining councils are concluding memorandums of agreement with the Uif in specific areas. You know, it could be the Restaurant and Bargaining Council.
Okay.
And then that's got specific requirements about employees being paid and how they're going to be paid.
Okay, fantastic.
Very promising. But then they obviously would not be entitled to claim these other benefits that I've been discussing with you, because they will be covered under the specific collective agreement.
Okay. Bronwyn, thank you for covering those things. I think we've got a few more minutes, which might be worthwhile to cover some general questions. We have seen that a company can, from a legal point of view, put their staff on unpaid leave until a certain period. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
So the legal principle is basically that if your business is shut down and the employees are at home and they can't work, obviously it's a different story if your employees can work remotely, then this doesn't matter at all. They would still be entitled to payment. But if they can't work, that means they can't tender their services and they would not be entitled to payment. So there's a no work, no pay principle that would be applicable.
Okay. And can an employer reduce its employees' salaries to a certain percentage?
That is that's certainly one of the considerations. That would have to be through consultation and agreement with the employees. But a lot of our clients are just in discussions with their employees, and they are having to have the very serious discussion about reducing salaries, because there's a fine line between balancing the business and the continuation of the business and being able to pay employees their full salaries. So a lot of employees may be faced with the fact that if they don't agree to reducing salaries, that in the long run, they'll face a business that has to close, or retrenchments, or companies liquidated, things like that. They're very, very severe consequences at the moment.
And when you say consultation, I mean, obviously you can't sit in a room with the employees now. Is that a one-on-one per employee, or is it a letter? What kind of process should a company follow?
Well, I would suggest that they would, in these circumstances, they probably would have to issue a letter to say what they are considering, give people time to consider it, and they would have to use one of these facilities, preferably to have consultations. Maybe not all the employees at once, but they would have to consult in some form.
Consult on it. And what would you say if, could an employer also consider retrenchment at this time?
Absolutely. I think that there's going to be a lot of retrenchments as a result of this, unfortunately. But there's a lot of businesses that won't be able to survive this. And now, also another consideration is that a lot of businesses have realized that they don't need as many employees as they had, and a lot of things can be done virtually and remotely and that kind of thing. So it's going to change the way that people conduct their business, which is ultimately going to result in a lot of retrenchments.
That's a very scary time, and I don't know if that's where the pressure comes on to really develop small business and entrepreneurs that can start their own business that can be more flexible. But it is terrifying that I think the job losses are going to be something we see in the next 6 to 8 weeks.
Absolutely, even longer, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there was another question that was raised around what are the, if someone does contact or contract COVID-19, sick leave, what process do they need to follow in terms of that?
Well, absolutely. If the business is shut down, there should be constant communication between the employer and the employees. Obviously, if a person is now sick and they can get a medical certificate because they would need, and it's as a result of COVID-19, they would then immediately let their employer know, because once you're on sick leave, then you would be paid during that period because you're entitled to sick leave in terms of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Every employee who works 5 days a week is entitled to 30 days over a 36-month period.
Yes. What if you have exceeded those 36 days due to a prior, not 36 months, sorry, those 30 days due to a prior condition?
Well, then it would be unpaid, but we are obviously advising clients. We would say that a prudent, responsible employer should look at potentially putting employees on annual leave. And in terms of a directive issued by the Minister of Labour on the 26th of March, you actually now can insist that employees take annual leave.
Yes, we did see that, absolutely. But I quite enjoy the term that you're using about being a responsible employer. So whilst there's a way of finding now that you can do more with less, but also sort of keeping the humanity in it.
Absolutely. And I think that is something that's come across a lot from government as well. They understand that companies are going to be suffering now, but they've been impressing upon companies to please, the ones that can, to please pay their employees, because of this no work, no pay principle. you wouldn't be required to pay them, but there are, I mean, there's going to be a lot of hungry people after 21 days of not working and not receiving payment. So they are saying, please, if you can, please pay the employees, or look at alternative ways that employees may receive remuneration. And I'm a big believer that using annual leave is a good way of doing that.
Yes, for the short term, absolutely.
Because obviously you'd exhaust annual leave, and then it would be sick leave if the person's sick, and ultimately then they would only be on unpaid leave.
Okay, so that's the process that needs to be followed. An interesting question that was raised, I feel like I should know the answer, but can an employee be dismissed if they do contract COVID-19?
So it is an interesting question that's raised. Obviously, it would be an incapacity issue due to ill health, and any employer has to follow the right procedure if somebody contracts COVID-19. So you would have to look at the illness, the seriousness of the illness. They would have to determine whether it's a temporary illness or it could be more permanent, how it's going to actually affect the person, whether they'll be able to continue in their role or whether their role could be adapted. If it can't be adapted, or they don't have to adapt it or find an alternative role, then they would have to hold an incapacity hearing, and they could ultimately, once they've considered all these options, given the person an opportunity to be heard, potentially got a medical report, then consider dismissal as an appropriate outcome.
Well, we hope that many who do contract don't get symptoms that bad. And you think about the Prime Minister Boris is sitting in ICU, so we can't say it's not a serious condition, but we do hope that, we have more lucky ones here than in other countries. Bronwyn, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much. A very difficult time for employers and employees. It's a fine line between legally what you can do, but also the humanity. And we do urge our small businesses to try and be responsible employers, keep the humanity with what's going on. I know many have literally, as owners of their businesses, not taken salaries just in order to pay their staff. And we respect you doing that. And when we did our very first podcast, what was interesting is we reflected on the recession of 2008. And Bronwyn, what was stated there, or what they found, is that companies that looked after their employees first, or as far as possible that they could, were the ones that were able to come out of the recession a lot quicker. So I hope our small businesses take that to heart. And I'm sure it's going to be a very busy time for you at FluxMans with all the labor queries. But thank you so much for your expertise, and for FluxMans for taking the time with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.